Hi, Graham Vincent, violin maker and musician. It's Friday, it's Q&A time. So I printed out a few, well, most all of the questions that have come in this week, so let's dive straight in and tackle them. I've got a question from Owen, who has joined me on Patreon. So, I mean, I've only just started on Patreon. Owen, this is massively appreciated, your help. Hi Graham, thanks for your videos. I found them very interesting. For someone who is interested in violin making but with little or no experience of woodworking, how would you recommend to proceed? Is it better to start with simpler projects, making boxes, etc., to get a feel for things before moving on to something as complex as a violin? Thanks. Okay. Owen, I'm assuming that this is effectively going to be something that's a hobby. I'm assuming therefore that you don't have an infinite amount of time every week to actually sort of put into this. So I actually think if you're interested in making a violin, the best thing you can do is make a violin. But I would gather together some scrap wood as well as the actual sort of wood that you want to make the violin from. And every time you get to a new part, I would do a couple of little practice sort of goes. You know, for example, one of the earliest things you're going to be doing is joining the front and the back. And I think, you know, if you've got some scrap wood, do a nice joint. When you're happy with that joint, do another one. If you're happy with that, then actually sort of joint the material you're going to be using. Same with, you know, some of the tools. Same with, you know, test how you're going to use a scraper on some of the scrap wood. Scroll carving. That might be a little bit. That might be an area where you want to do a complete dummy carve. Really, make a sort of a waste one before you do the real one. Might even be worth doing one in something like plasticine, just to get a sort of a feel for the curves and how that's working. Certainly things like cutting the channel for the purfling and so on. Test all your cutting and so on a piece of scrap before you proceed. So yeah, answer to the question. I would dive straight in because there's only so many hours in the day, and that's the thing that interests you. You're going to find it so much easier to actually do something that you're interested in rather than something than you're not. So, slightly contentious answer, but honestly, I think for someone like me, that would be the way to do it. I hope that helps. Let me know how it goes. Aaron, also on Patreon. Aaron, thank you. Your videos are very helpful in understanding details and how things are done. I would really like to see how you decide to cut the ribs from a board. Does grain direction matter? Do I need to build a jig and use a bandsaw to cut for a specific cross section of grain? Or do I just need a strip of wood that meets the dimensions? Am I right in thinking you have a bandsaw from this? I'm not sure. If you've got a bandsaw's good. If you don't have a bandsaw, then almost any saw, you know, with a reasonably fine kerf will do. We're not talking about terribly big bits of wood here, so that's in your favour. Now, in terms of grain direction, I mean, starting with the obvious, that the grain lengthwise runs around the instrument, and that has to be the case. Let's consider rippled maple, figured maple on violins. That is generally, almost invariably, cut quarter sawn. The one exception for that being some figured backs, which are one piece, where you can see that it's slab sawn, and you can also see it's got a slightly different look, a different effect. So the classic violin ripple is produced by cutting timber quarter sawn, whereas bird's eye maple, for example, the classic look is produced by cutting slab sawn, and it doesn't look the same if it isn't. So I think because of the constraining nature of a curve, so these ribs, even though they're only 1.3 millimeters thick, when they're curved, they've got an inherent strength, an inherent structure, which will control things like movement in a slab sawn piece of timber. So I don't tend to use jigs on a bandsaw personally. I tend to do things by eye. If I was, let me just do a little sketch here. I'm just going to draw, there's a square. Imagine I'm looking end on at a piece of wood, and the grain, the direction I want to cut it is like that. well, rather than making a jig or angling the bed, I would tend to actually sort of cut or plane off this. So now I can stand the timber the way I want it on the bed of the bandsaw. That's how I tend to tackle things like that, because I like to control direction and so on the bandsaw by eye. I know a lot of people do use fences and jigs on bandsaws. I don't know why, I'm just not in the habit of doing so personally. How do you decide which bridge to use? How do you shape and tune it? I understand fitting the feet and shaping the arch, I think, and I'm looking for more detail on shaping the sound. Just a couple of ideas. Okay, I've picked up this really grubby old bridge off the shelf. It's a little old Aubert bridge. It looks quite small. I think it may be off a 3/4 size violin. So generally they're between about sort of 4.5 and 5.5 at the base. Generally they come down to something like 1.5 millimeters at the top. That can be square, that can be rounded over. I tend to round the tops of mine. The face, which is the side facing the fingerboard, which is generally where the name etc. is, your stamp is, that is always completely flat, and that face should be 90 degrees to the underside of the front, so along the edge. This line there, that face of the bridge should stand 90 degrees to that. Obviously that's something you set when you're shaping the feet and fitting it to the front. Then the back is generally goes from that 4.5, 5.5 mil down to that 1.5 in 2 bevels effectively. The first one is a fairly simple, fairly shallow cut, and then the second one is a steeper one coming to that edge. And obviously because you've got it's coming to a sort of a curve, that break line between the two is curved as well, and then sort of rounded over a little bit. So the weight of the bridge in terms of how much material you leave affects the sound. The lighter it is, the more trebly, and much too trebly if you make it too thin, the violin will sound, and the heavier, the thicker, especially the top part, the darker the violin will sound. So it's a sort of balance between that. Then you can take some mass out of it by carving something away here. You can increase the size of these 2 kidney openings here, these 2 kidney shaped openings, and that will reduce this area here, and that will allow the top to move more freely on the bass. Now this is when all sorts of questions start to run through your mind. If that moves more freely, does that mean it transmits less sound, or does it mean it allows the string to really get into vibration and sort of make a louder sound? In my experience, the less material you have here, the more open the whole violin will sound. So I tend to take a bit out there, but not as much as some people do. Yeah, you see some people cutting bridges so that there's, not much. That pencil line there represents the top of the bridge. I exaggerate, but there's very little above this heart-shaped opening here, and some people, where it's way up here, so there's a lot above it. In terms of the proportion of that, I think this little bridge here is a good example of a fair proportion between the two. Then, apart from that, you get all sorts of other fancy shaping and carving and cutting away and so on. And I think a lot of that is just style and to make it look elegant. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. So Yeah, the rule of thumb is consider the flexibility of it, consider the stability of it, as in it's got to stand there and not sort of bend because it's too thin, and consider you know, how thin it is at the top, how thick it is at the bottom, really. Experiment. Yeah, in addition to using this sort of classical style of bridge, I also got a set of plans of mine here. Quite a lot of the time I use a sort of a more of a Baroque style bridge, and again that's personal taste and just what I like the look of and the sound of. I don't know if I've really answered that question very well. It's a bit of a black art. Play around with it. I think if you follow the sort of the fairly standard procedures, and stick with the sort of, you know, fall, you know, midway in what most people choose to do, that's a really good starting point. And then you can, when you play that particular instrument, you can go, does this sound too bright? In which case you will want to put another bridge on which has a bit more weight to it, or does it sound a bit darker than you want? In which case you could consider taking a bit more weight out of the bridge. So, yeah, that's kind of my answer to that one. I hope that helps. Okay, thanks, Aaron. That's great. Gervais Gallant. Some interesting topics on this one. Thanks again. Can you talk a little about the plans you sell? Is this a Strat or something, a group from a violin you liked? Also, could you mention briefly the process you use for the plans, what templates you make from these, and how you work with the plans otherwise? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I will do a video just about the plans and nothing else, actually, but I'll go through them very, very briefly now. Yeah, I mean, basically, these are the plans. These are the sort of the plans that I make and produce and sell, and they are exactly my standard design, so to speak. So this violin here, for example, is made from these plans. My standard form is my own shape, but is very much inspired by the sort of slightly eccentric English makers of the early 18th century. They in turn had, you know, learnt style and learnt the designs from seeing copies of Amatis. So that tends to be more of an Amati kind of influenced shape than a Strat shape. Strad shape. Oh, slipping into guitars now. But you will notice my corners are a little bit smaller than most Amatis, and that's because I absolutely love Guarneri, I have to say. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of a hybrid, but it's very much my own form, and it's one that I settled on fairly early on, and I've only made minor tweaks and changes to it. I'm now approaching violin number 50, and yeah, the last sort of 30 of them have been fairly close to this design with only one or two little changes. So it's my own design in as much as any violin is your own design. And the other question was about how to use this from here. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, basically, it's got lots and lots of information on it that you don't need to cut out, so to speak, but it's also got things like the sort of neck template and body sort of template here, and it's got arching details down the bottom, actually in cross-sectional form. You could either photocopy parts of the plan, stick them down, you could put tracing paper over them and trace them, or you could just simply mark through the plans, or if you were happy about it, you could cut the plans up and use bits of the plans. The only templates I kind of use generally are, where are we? let me just reach over here. Oop. So these are the sort of templates that I use. That's on the plans, although I laser cut one for myself. That is a scroll template. That's on the later plans. And that's another one that I use for marking out, but I use that for marking out the F holes, and those are on here as well. But you probably the internal form is as useful as that. But all of these things are on the plans, so yeah, I think probably tracing paper is the way to do it. And oops, just knocked my stool over. You don't need many sort of templates really for violin making. As I may have mentioned before, I personally don't use templates for the arching, for example, but you could make some from this. I tend to like to do the arching freeform by eye, which adds a bit of variation to every violin as I go. What else did you ask? I think that's kind of answered your question, Gervais, as best as I can. Thanks for that. Right, Brennan 985 is a very patient chap. He sent in a few questions a couple of times, and I don't know how I've managed it, but I seem to have managed to miss one of his questions each particular time, and it wasn't because I didn't want to answer it. So let me just, I've got his on 2 sheets I think here, so let me just make sure I got both of them. Yay, here we go. Okay, so how did you develop your template for the body, neck, scroll, fingerboard, etc.? I think we've actually pretty much covered that. I think we have, haven't we? How did you develop your plans? Yeah, same. Have you made a violin with a one-piece back? Would a one-piece top work? I have. I regularly, in fact, I prefer one-piece backs to jointed backs. For example, this is a one-piece back. The other one, the other one I made at the same time as that one, the ash one, that's also got a one-piece back. So yeah, I do. I like making one-piece back violins. It saves you one extra joint, but apart from anything else, I just prefer the look of it. That's the main reason I do it. I mean, obviously sometimes you haven't got a large enough piece of wood with timber, and yes, you tend to then go for a jointed one. Would a one-piece top work? It would, but generally the sort of width that you need with the grain pattern that you need isn't really available very easily, very readily. I have, hang on a minute. I mean, I'm just in the process of starting the next 2 violins, so I've been kind of putting the jointing stuff as we go. This is a reclaimed draw side, which I'm going to be using for the front, and it wasn't quite wide enough. So what I did is actually sort of used a bit of timber from up here around here for that one, and similarly from that one around there, just to give me a little bit more. It's only literally sort of a 1/4 inch on each side, but so that will certainly have the appearance of being a one-piece top. Inevitably it means that one side will have a slightly wider grain than the other, and I'm going to put the wider grain on the bass side. Bald cypress is common here. Would that be a good wood for either top or back? Do you know what? I should have looked up what a bald cypress is. I have no idea what it is. But I mean, as you know, I kind of championed the use of whatever timber is available if it meets certain criteria. So it's got to meet exactly the same, it's got to pass the same tests as any other piece of wood. You know, when you it's got to be sort of, flawless is not the right word. It's got to be structurally sound. You don't want something that's full of cracks and shakes and so on. Fewer knots is better, although I have on occasion used the odd knot in a piece of timber. But you want it to look reasonably attractive. But the most important things are, it should be a reasonably low density, unless it's a specifically special piece of wood that you want to use. It should be fairly stiff, and most important of all, if you tap a piece of this wood, it should really ring. It should sound like it wants to be part of a xylophone, because if it doesn't, then it's just going to absorb the sound. When it's turned into a violin, it'll be a very dull violin. So yeah, I mean, bald cypress, as I say, I know nothing about, but if it actually sort of fulfills those criteria, then I can't see any reason why not. In video 53, you mentioned using a router to set the thickness at the edge and channel area. Do you still use it? Is there a video of it on your channel? No, there isn't. I'll show you what it is. I made this ages ago. So it's got a rise and fall. That's a part of an old lathe. It's got a very simple depth stop there. It's a really cheap Katsu router, a rather expensive bracket, just a birch ply frame held together with coach bolts. I haven't glued it because I thought, well, if I want to take it to bits and turn it into something else, I will. It's got a bed, and I mean, you can see how this works. It's rock solid, and it means that you can set any distance that you want between the table and that. It's scary to use. I don't use it much. I don't use it much at all nowadays, to be honest. It's taking up rather a lot of space in the workshop now, and I'm seriously considering what its future might be. And I think its future might be that it's turned into something else. But it does do a couple of jobs really quite well. So there we are. So yeah, that's that one. I hope I've finally answered all of Brennan 985's questions. Please send in some more, Brennan. Great. Monty. Yeah, Monty Lathan 739. I may have missed it somehow, but what are your thoughts on tight bond hide glue? Right, tight bond hide glue I have never used. My understanding basically is that it is a collagen based glue that is liquid at room temperature, so rather than having the gel setting as it cools, it relies purely on losing moisture to actually set. More like a sort of a fish glue, I suppose, because that's my understanding of that, although again I haven't used it. That is certainly something on my list to try. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know that, I mean, I watched a few YouTube videos on it at various stages in the past when I was hunting around for various glues, and people who use it seem to like it. But personally, I haven't seen any reason why I would want to prefer, why I should prefer that over traditional hide glue. But if you try it and you find out, a compelling reason, please let me know. Basically, I'd be very interested to hear, if you do use it, how it goes. Right, someone's asked a question and I have managed to chop their name off this, which is a bit embarrassing. Sorry, I do apologise. Whoever it was said, scroll making is a challenge. Getting each side symmetrical from every angle has proved taxing and frustrating. Is there a time-honoured way to make a good-looking scroll in hard flamed maple without too much anxiety? Yeah, I feel your pain on this one. I think we all know exactly what you're talking about. So this is a bit of an odd one to demonstrate with, because I only had a very narrow piece of wood, so I actually sort of squashed down the width of the design, but it's what I have available to demonstrate anyway. So yeah, first things first, the blank that the piece of wood that you're starting with, make sure that both sides are parallel, and then get one face, which can be, if you wish, the underside of the fingerboard, so to speak. You know, the face that's glued to that the fingerboard is glued onto. Get that perfectly 90 degrees to the cheeks. Okay, so you've got this nice, sort of nicely prepared stock. Then mark out the shape, and then cut that. So you've got a block which is all perfectly square, and where this outer line is set and is true. Okay, so if that's a really important thing to do first of all, because if you don't do that, by whatever means you use to do it, hang on one moment. Back to the next two violins that I'm making. I mean, I'd be interested if anyone can identify that piece of wood. There's something very, very specific to this particular type of wood. I'll just leave that hanging in the air there. But that's one where, I mean, the two sides are square, and my next job now is to actually sort of plane that, and then I will, because I've rough sawn this on the bandsaw, I will then put the template onto it, mark it, and make sure those are cut through accurately. So then, using whatever template you've got, mark on both sides, you know, the shape of it, and then the fun really starts. I think the biggest trick, the best way to do it so it's consistent, I would say, is I'm just trying to think this through, because I mean, I have done this so that I've literally done that bit, that bit, that bit, that bit, that bit, that bit, and also I've done it so that on other violins I've done it so I've just done one side completely and then done the other side, and I'm trying to consider if either one is a better option for you. I don't think that I have a preference. I tend to do one side and then the other side nowadays. Yeah. Where are we? Oh, just knocked my stool over again. I mean, once this is cut to shape and so on, then you mark a center line on it, and then you use whatever method you're going to use for sort of marking out that first line. But I think the biggest secret as such, because where are we? It's really tempting. When you're cutting into this, it's very tempting to actually undercut stuff as you go, and obviously one of the things that makes a scroll look its best is when it looks like the individual sort of the bits actually run through. So you want to avoid kind of undercutting those bits of the scroll, and even to the extent where you might, you know, rather than cutting them perpendicular, you might even cut them running out slightly, because then you can trim them in as you go. I know what I mean. I can hear this, and I'm not convinced that I'm really getting across what I want to say completely. So I actually, because I've done a video on scroll cutting, but it was a kind of it wasn't really a how-to. It was just a sort of a video watching me cutting a scroll. So maybe I should do a proper scroll cutting video. I think I will add that to the list. That would be really useful. So apologies for not totally answering your question, but we will get to that, I think, on a subsequent video, because it's such an important one. I mean, the scroll is such a defining part of the instrument. It's yeah. Wilma Mancia 5528. Hello, Mr. Vincent. Greetings from Honduras. Have you tried teak wood for the violin neck or back and sides? No, I haven't. I mean, obviously, you all know that I've tried various timbers. It's not from some obsession to try every single timber I possibly can. It's just more a question of, you know, using what I have available to me. And if you have teak available to you, then maybe it's something you should consider. Does it look nice? Well, we know teak looks nice. It's quite dense though, isn't it? Or is it? I don't know. I know it can be quite oily. That might be an issue when it comes to sort of gluing it all together. I'm not sure how resonant it is. Whether, you know, when you hold up a piece of teak and tap it, does it ring? I don't know is the answer to that. So yeah, not sure about that. I have a couple of concerns, but again, I'd be really interested to hear if you do go ahead with that, and let me know. But again, I would be just it's got to look attractive. It's got to be not too dense. It's got to be stable. It's got to be very resonant. If it fulfills those, then why not, basically. DIY Dark Matters. Right, here's a couple of questions. Yeah, I've no shortage of. Some people were making a violin treat the inside of them with like a hide glue, or in some cases a mixture of that. I can't remember. What do you think about using a wood hardener as a treatment? Okay, we're talking about the wood hardener that DIY Dark Matter is discussing is the sort of the one that you use for stabilizing some types of wood against rot, or if they're partially rotted already. Yeah, I've used it in the past when I was repairing window frames for myself. I don't know. I'm not sure that making it harder is necessarily what you would want to be doing, because that will affect its resonant frequency. The harder it is, the higher the frequency will become, I suspect. And actually, you want it to be, well, my personal experience is that you want the body to have as a lower resonant frequency as you can. So I think actually that might be counterproductive. I have used a heat curing epoxy when I was doing the torrefied fingerboards. That was great, really good stuff. If not for the treatment, maybe the hardener would work well to reinforce the area of the plates where the sound posts rest. That's an interesting proposition, isn't it? That's an interesting proposition. For about 15 violins in a row, I actually used to put in a little, not a patch let in, but a patch applied to the surface, and canted slightly so that the grain was very slightly at angles to the grain underneath, to reinforce the area where the sound post was. I think Joseph Curtin does that as well, or has done certainly in the past. Yeah, well, Mr. DIY Dark Matter, I am intrigued by that thought. I shall have to give it some thought. Yeah, don't know the answer to that. I'd have to see what if the trade-off between sort of hardening the timber is if it makes it more brittle, it may be a bad idea. Don't know. Old man artist. What is the purpose of the UV box? And how was this done before modern UV light technology? I've seen posts where people say using sunlight warps or can crack woods. And that's the reason for using UV box to tan the woods. Okay. I mean, in the summer, I tend to hang my violins that are being finished in the conservatory in the sunlight. In the winter, I have a UV box. I'll do a video about how that's set up, I think. But basically, this is my UV box. It's like the special handmade hinges and catches, but it's nothing special. It's got a mirror ball motor on the outside at the top, so this slowly rotates round. It's got various UV lamps in it, and it's got when it's in place, it's got an extraction there, and you put your violin or violins in there, and they slowly tick around and are blasted by UV, and it accelerates the curing. I mean, the reason that we use those is that in a lot of the year here in the UK and in many places, there just isn't that much UV light, to be honest. And if you need UV light to actually sort of cure varnish and so on, then you've got to get it from somewhere. Otherwise, you can wait weeks and weeks and weeks for the varnish to go off, as opposed to sticking it in a box like that and for it to go off literally overnight. So yeah, that's the reason for using that. The other job you do with a UV box is actually sort of blasting the timber with UV before you do any colouring or varnishing, because I mean, sort of there's a reason why people call unfinished timber, you know, or in the white, so to speak, because gosh, it really does look white. Whereas after you've blasted it with UV or left it in the sun for a few weeks, it goes a really nice biscuity colour. And one of the secrets about varnishing violins is if you can get the timber itself to be quite a nice colour before you start, the actual job of varnishing suddenly is very, very easy and very simple. Whereas if you're trying to get a nice warm colour and you're putting it, you know, you're starting with an object which is white, then it's an uphill struggle. But that really is the subject for another video. Yeah, so I hope that answers that one to an extent. As I say, I'm going to do a video about my UV box because it is quite amusing. Monty Latham, 739. Have you heard of a shopsmith? These are designed for small shops. The machine itself takes up no more space than a bicycle and can be changed into 7 different functions. I can see it being very useful to you. I have seen them. I've never used one. I'm kind of blessed here because one thing I have got lots of is space, to be honest. So I mean, I've got, you know, I've got a little bandsaw, and I've got my my bench saw, and over here I've obviously got the one that I just showed you there. I've got a disc sander I use very occasionally. I don't know if you can see it. Bobbin sander, lathe, belt sander, pillar drill, all hidden behind that bit of cardboard that I was saving for something. I haven't used it yet. So yeah, I mean, I don't, for violin making itself, I try not to use tools that often, to be honest. I don't use them that much. I mean, it's been quite a few months since I used the circular saw, and that wasn't for violin making. Pillar drill, I will be using to pop the pilot holes for the pegs through here. Going back to that subject about carving scroll, put them through before you do all the carving and so on, because that means that you're more likely to end up with pegs that are all nicely in line, you know, and aren't sort of pointing all over the place. If you end up late in the day using a hand drill to put those in, it's if you're not careful, it can end up not looking too good or accurate. Yeah, so Shopsmith, yeah. I mean, I've heard of them. I haven't really much to add about those. I mean, I certainly don't need any more machines. I'm quite happy to get rid of a couple of them, to be honest. So that's one of my plans coming up, is to do so. Question from Belarus. Like channel. Please make a video on how and what you use to paint varnish violins. Yeah, I think I will do something on that. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I mean, obviously, I think I've been far more open about technique and so on than many people have. I think I will do a video on varnishing, and I'll go through the process and actually probably do the video as I varnish a violin. But I'll just do it in one particular way, and it won't necessarily be all of the things that I do to varnish my violins, but it will be everything that you need to do to varnish a violin well, if that makes sense. So yeah. Fireman 9143, have we done this one already, or was it it's kind of a duplicate question. Would you do a video about cutting the ribs? I'm really confused about how important grain direction is, and how you decide where to cut when you reclaim wood. I think we've kind of addressed that one already. Grain on the ribs. First of all, the one immutable is that the grain has to run around the rib, so to speak. Then it's a question of choosing. You may have constraints in the available amount of material that you can't, you have to just lay it out so it works. But it's normally just a question of cutting it so that you get the best looking ribs, really, so that there's a sort of a pattern that works. I mean, these aren't flamed, but so you see some people choose to have the flaming working the same all the way around. Other people seem to do it like that, then like that, and then like this. I don't think I've seen anywhere it does that and then that. So you have to consider if you've got a really pronounced figure, how that follows around the whole instrument. Yeah, I think that's the last of the questions. This is 40 odd minutes so far, and I've got some plans for videos coming up, I'm going to do one on the UV chamber. I'm going to do one on varnish. I just said scroll cutting, didn't I, as well? So that'd be a really good one, I think. I'm going to do a couple of ones on tools as well coming up, one on paring chisels, one on a carving vise that I've just got hold of, which is looking, it's going to be really useful. And then also I've strung up the other one, which I made at the same time. This sounds fantastic. I'm going to do a video on that before it goes off with the couriers. I am hoping to get this one strung up this afternoon, or possibly first thing tomorrow, and I will do a video on that as well. So anyway, this video has gone on quite long enough. Hope it's been useful. So there we go. Look after yourselves. Cheers, folks. Bye.